There. Good evening. Welcome to our Friday night Bible study. I'm trying to get the phone to go through to my wife here so she can join us. There. Are you there?
Hello.
Hello. Very good. Okay, let me set this down over here. This is for Friday, June 6th, 2025. It's our first study in the month of June. And I noticed something interesting kind of in the news. I was poking through Facebook a little while ago, and somebody had posted a video of a fireball that they saw in a state not far away from ours. And I looked at it, and it was a typical meteor, but it was apparently pretty close because you could actually see the big orange fireball as this thing broke apart in Earth's atmosphere. So it got pretty close. And then I saw somewhere else a posting that this is part of a regular, and I forget the name now, I've clicked away from it, a regular meteor shower, and it's going to be at its peak tonight and tomorrow night. So if you live in an area where this is visible, you might want to get out in the evening after dark and see if you can see any of this meteor shower with the so-called shooting stars.
I have a request.
Okay?
Let's go tonight. I bet we can get some free from light pollution there.
Where did you suggest?
Iceland.
Iceland?
Yeah. We could fly to Reykjavik.
Reykjavik, yeah. um, yeah. Iceland is known for its waterfalls. Um, I
A couple hours, couldn't we?
I play a puzzle game on Facebook that includes a lot of pictures, and some of the sets that I have selected and that I play from time to time include pictures of various waterfalls in Iceland. So I spent quite a bit of time paying attention to Iceland, and so yeah, that's interesting. Let me go find something real quick here. Be right back. I should have brought these out before. Now, this may not look like much, and it might not be a reason to think of anything. It's just a typical slotted plastic serving spoon of the type that you're supposed to use when you're using nonstick cookware, particularly back in the days when um, Teflon was the reigning nonstick surface in cookware because it could be a little bit more easily scratched with metal. So, plastic was the way to go. For some odd reason, I actually got out the really close-up glasses. I know you can't read it, but there is text inside the back of the handle, and it says King Craft, and then below, an even smaller type, this is what I had to get my really close-up glasses out to read, Northern Plastics Inc., Elroy, Wisconsin, with a zip code there. Now, I'm a weird person, and that kind of struck me. I'm not sure where we got these. I think we probably got these at a little roadside novelty shop, knick-knack shop, somewhere in Michigan, as we were traveling from where we lived to where my folks lived.
I actually had some before we got married.
Yeah, but I wonder if those, I think maybe the ones you had are the Foley set that we've got. We got a bunch of Foley things in there. And
Oh,
I do recall getting something at a spot between Mayo and Traverse City that we used to go by. I know when we first got married, we married at Christmas of '89, and my wife got a job with the Census Bureau during the 1990 census. And the place where she worked was in something of a little retail mall in a nearby town. And while she was there, she went to a shop and she bought some more of this kind of stuff. But I don't think it was these items. I think it was some other stuff that we've got. But at any rate, that kind of got me interested to see if I could see where Northern Plastics Inc. was in Elroy, Wisconsin. Well, Elroy, Wisconsin was easy to find. I won't show it to you tonight, but it was easy to find. So then I did a Google search for the company because I couldn't see anything that said that. And Google search came up with NMI Incorporated. Well, okay, maybe they had a company name change. And that gave me a number of references, one of which was a link to the company's website. But that got me to wondering because when I loaded up the website, the copyright notice on it said 2014. That's 11 years ago. If they were maintaining that site, almost certainly whoever they had doing it for them would have the presence of mind to update the copyright date, which says to me that nothing's been updated on that site since 2014. It makes me wonder if the company's still in business. And when I looked up the address they gave for it, it points to a spot that appears never to have had buildings on it. It's in the south side of this little town of Elroy, Wisconsin. The website for the company did have some pictures, and I did see some buildings that looked like they might match it, but some of those buildings had a different name on them. So I don't know if this company, NMI Inc., formerly known as Northern Plastics Inc., is still in business. But in the meantime, I came across another little bit of information that I found totally fascinating. At one point, this company had like 4 employees. And it became a company with a whole lot more employees because they got a lucrative contract. The company that made this plastic serving spoon is the same company that manufactured the plastic parts for the game Trivial Pursuit. And the site that came up to tell me about that said that this company had, over a period of less than 3 years, had manufactured 30 million of these games. Now, when you consider that the United States population is in the neighborhood of a little over 300 million, you've got a game that reached approximately 10% of the U.S. population. Oh, interesting little factoid there that I ran across. That's just, I'm weird like that. I go chasing down information to find something about it, and occasionally you run across these really interesting coincidences like that. So, and checking where we are here, everything looks good. So I think we're prepared to get into our study of the book of 2 Kings. We stopped in the middle of chapter 6 last week because our time kind of ran out, and I did want to take a little bit of time with the next story in the chapter that we were reading. So let's plan to do that now, and let's bow our heads and begin. Our Father in heaven, we thank you for your blessings to us. We thank you for giving us the wonderful benefits of knowing you and of turning to you for help and for comfort in this troubled world. we want to understand you better. We believe that you operate out of love and that you don't do anything destructive. You're the creator, not the destroyer. As we examine some of these difficult passages in the Old Testament, help us to see through the human clouds that cover you and see the true glory of your character. Send your Holy Spirit toward that end for the benefit of each individual who hears this. We ask in Jesus' name. Amen. So let's switch over here from our full camera view to our Friday night view. That's the name I've given it. It's not particularly different. I have, well, let's see here. I have, these things are called scenes. I have this scene, which I've called Start Banner. That's what I put up when I'm playing so that you're not seeing any distracting things in the room. This is what I use for the sermon presentations, where the camera is made very small so you can see the whole presentation on the screen. I have made it possible for you to see just what's on the display. Don't use that often, but it's there. This is the full camera, and then the scene that we use for the Bible study, which I call Friday night, which gives the full width of the camera but also has the text visible to you. Because I believe it's helpful to people to be able to read along so that they not only hear it but they see it as well, and that helps increase the grasp you have of the written material. So this is the story titled Elisha Traps the Arameans, and in some versions they'll call it Elijah Traps Blinded Arameans. And of course we know the Arameans are what we would today call the Syrians. They're the people of the nation north of Israel, with their headquarters, their capital, in Damascus. And Damascus is an important city throughout the Bible, but also in the New Testament. Damascus was where Paul received his sight back, which kind of interesting given the story we're about to read. Now, the king of Aram in this case is Ben-Hadad, and we should tonight get to the part where Ben-Hadad is no longer the king of Aram, but right now it's Ben-Hadad. When the king of Aram was at war with Israel, he would confer with his officers and say, "We will mobilize our forces at such and such a place." But immediately Elisha, the man of God, would warn the king of Israel. Now this is most likely one of the sons of Ahab, I forget the exact name, it begins with J. I'm coming up with the wrong names. We'll get there, we'll see it. But it is this second son of Ahab to hold the throne, because the first one, Ahaziah, only reigned for 2 years. He was injured when he fell through the lattice work and injured himself, and he died of those injuries. So now his brother has taken the throne, and he's the one that's still at war with Ben-Hadad, and he's getting advice from Elisha, saying, here is what Ben-Hadad plans. And so it says, Elisha would tell him, do not go near that place, for the Arameans are planning to mobilize their troops there. So the king of Israel would send word to the place indicated by the man of God. Time and again, Elisha warned the king so that he would be on the alert there. Well, that can be very frustrating if you're in the military and you're seeking to use stealth and secrecy to gain an advantage over your enemy, and it seems like everything you do, your enemy knows ahead of time what you're doing, like he's sitting there in your councils with you and hearing what you plan so that he's able to plan his countermeasures. Kind of removes the whole point of the secrecy and the stealth. And so the text then tells us that the king of Aram became very upset over this. He called his officers together and demanded, "Which of you is the traitor? Who has been informing the king of Israel of my plans?" So he knows something's going on because every time he makes a move, the king of Israel's prepared for it. And he suspects that somebody amongst his counselors, those who go with him as he makes his plans, is leaking information. So he needs some plumbers to stop his leaks. So he holds this meeting and he demands, "I want to know who's leaking information to the king of Israel." "It's not us, my lord the king," one of the officers replied. "Elisha, the prophet in Israel, tells the king of Israel, even the words you speak in the privacy of your bedroom." Yeah. One wonders how this person knew that. Or maybe this person, unnamed here, is Naaman. And Naaman has met Elisha. He knows something about Elisha's power, and that may be how he's figured out how the king of Israel seems to know everything that his king, Ben-Hadad, is about to do. We don't know. It doesn't say specifically. It's just one of the officers. But we know that Naaman was an officer of Ben-Hadad, so maybe it was him. Just maybe. Well, that Ben-Hadad is angry. He's upset. He's frustrated. Everything he tries to do doesn't work. So he's like the typical ego-inflated human. Hey, if I want something, I get it. I want this stopped. I'm going to do whatever it takes to get it. And maybe that means finding and killing this prophet who's been telling the king of Israel everything I'm about to do. "Go and find out where he is," the king commanded, "so I can send troops to seize him." And the report came back. Elisha is at Dothan. So one night the king of Aram sent a great army with many chariots and horses to surround the city. So he sets up an ambush, a siege around the city. When the servant of the man of God got up early the next morning and went outside, there were troops, horses, and chariots everywhere. "Oh, sir, what will we do now?" the young man cried to Elisha. Now here's another question for you. Who is this servant? We read in the story of Naaman how Elisha had a servant named Gehazi, and Gehazi appeared earlier in the narrative. But in the narrative, the leprosy that had afflicted Naaman clings to Gehazi after he greedily tracked down Naaman to get the gifts that Naaman had tried to offer to Elisha and that Elisha had refused. So that makes us think, well, maybe Gehazi wasn't Elisha's servant at this time. That sounds reasonable. But we are about to run into the name Gehazi again a little further on in this telling. So we'll see. I don't know if it was him or not. But what's about to happen is also very interesting, because this servant comes to Elisha. He sees the city surrounded by the armies of Aram, and he runs to Elisha in a panic, perhaps even. What are we going to do now? The city's surrounded. Don't be afraid, Elisha told him, for there are more on our side than on theirs. And then Elisha prayed, O Lord, open his eyes and let him see. The Lord opened the young man's eyes, and when he looked up, he saw that the hillside around Elisha was filled with horses and chariots of fire. Where have we run across a chariot of fire? Are you listening in the other room?
Yeah. Did either Elijah or Elijah go up in the chariot of fire?
Yeah. And that gave me that's going to give me a chance to discuss something that I didn't really discuss before. When we get to the New Testament and we get to the story of the Mount of Transfiguration, we read there about how both Moses and Elijah appeared on the Mount of Transfiguration with Jesus. Now, the book of Jude, I was going to look that up this week, and it never actually got done. The book of Jude recounts a story about the resurrection of Moses, saying that when the archangel Michael came down to attend to the situation, that there was a confrontation between the archangel Michael and the devil over the body of Moses. It seems that the devil considered Moses his. He failed, he died, and the devil's like, you can't have him, you can't resurrect him. And Michael just said, the Lord rebuke you, and went along and brought Moses to heaven. The typical story about Elijah is that he was taken to heaven in this chariot of fire, translated to heaven, so they say, without tasting death. And we have a similar story way back in the book of Genesis, where it talks about the descendants of Adam and that lineage, and it gives how old each of them were. Most of them reached above 900 years of age, except for one named Enoch, who it says lived for 365 years, but it does not say that he died, but it rather says that he was not, for God took him. So that becomes another example, for certain people anyway, of a case of someone, a human being, being translated, that's the term they use, from earth to heaven without tasting death.
And he went up in fire.
There's a whole.
Burned.
You were going to say something?
And he went up in fire that didn't burn him.
Well, I'm going to talk about that here in a minute, because there's an aspect of this that's being revealed in this story that I find fascinating. But right now I'm talking about what happened to Elijah. there's a whole theology that I was raised with that you could only be translated to heaven without tasting death. You could only go straight from this mortal life into eternal life without dying bodily if you reached sinless perfection.
And you can not go to heaven without dying if you've ever eaten meat. You have to go to the grave to be cleansed from having eaten flesh food.
Well, there's all sorts of wild ideas out there about this.
I can't find that anywhere in the Bible.
Yeah. The whole sinless perfection thing is a kind of a theoretical quagmire that you don't really directly get to out of the scriptures. You kind of have to make a few little assumptions and leaps to get there. Now, will we eventually reach a state where we are no longer afflicted by sin? Well, I believe we will, but I don't think we'll ever claim that on this side of either the rapture or our own bodily death. So, and some of that simply is that it depends on your understanding of sin. The theology that holds that sinless perfection thing generally suggests that sin is bad deeds, disobeying the Ten Commandment law. That is sin. And they'll point to that text in John that says sin is the transgression of the law, which is a subordinate clause and shouldn't be taken as the meaning of the sentence, but that's what they do with it anyway. We've talked about that when we were there. But so this whole idea then is that Enoch and Elisha somehow reached a state of sinless perfection while still in this mortal body. And as a reward, then, God took them to heaven without them dying. Well, I'm not going to argue that God didn't take at least these two to heaven without them seeing death. And we do know that not only Moses, but a number of others went to heaven in special resurrections. Moses, at this one event that the timing of isn't given, except it must have been before Jesus came to earth. And the other then being at the death of Jesus, when the graves were opened, and then as Jesus was resurrected, they were resurrected and became what some people call the wave sheaf, a token of Jesus' triumph and of his eventual victory for the human race. He was able to take some of them with him to present as evidence of his victory on the cross. So, but then there's this issue. There's these chariots of fire, and supposedly Elisha is taken up with them. I know of a teacher who says that this was just a temporary thing, and that Elijah was dumped back to earth somewhere, Elijah rather, was dumped back to earth somewhere else. And as evidence, he points to a text, I don't think it's here in Kings, I think it's somewhere in Chronicles, where one of the kings of Israel receives a letter from Elijah. So this person's explanation of that is, well, Elijah was still around and was able to write this letter. Well, another take on that by other students is that Elijah wrote the letter while he was still here and entrusted it to somebody to deliver at the proper time. That's kind of mystical, but if you're dealing with the power of God and God lives in all times, and perhaps, yes, that could be an explanation for it. Another explanation, this doesn't go well with some people, is simply that the author made a mistake, meant to write Elisha, and by error wrote Elijah instead, so that the letter in question was written by Elisha, who was alive and on the earth at the time. However it happened, the story of the Transfiguration, the Mount of Transfiguration, tells us that Elisha was able to come to earth and appear with Jesus there on the mountain, as was Moses. Now, let's get to the bit we see in this story. Because this young man looked out, and all he could see was the Aramean army. All the horses and chariots and soldiers. And he's frightened. Apparently, Elisha was able to see something that this young man, whoever it was, could not see. And in response to Elisha's prayer, he gets the ability to see these horses and chariots of fire all around Elisha, so that he is protected from the Aramean army by forces that the Aramean army itself can't see. And neither could this young servant of Elisha see, until Elisha prayed for him to have his eyes opened. And that makes me wonder if, in fact, the chariots of fire that picked up Elijah, were something that only Elisha could see, and probably Elijah as well, and not something that the other young prophets who were involved in the story could have seen, even if they had been there. You know, we think horses and chariots of fire, well, that's a brilliant flash of light in the sky, and you're going to see it for miles and miles around, and yet these didn't see anything, and they went out and spent 3 days searching for Elijah. So I'm thinking that it's reasonable, given the description we see right here, that those horses and chariots of fire weren't visible to everybody, only to people whose eyes were open. At any rate, now we've read this part of the story, and we've discussed all this about Elijah and Elisha and the translation and all that stuff. Let's get back to this story. Because now the Aramean army advances toward him. And as they did so, Elisha prayed, "O Lord, please make them blind." So first he prays for his young servant to have his eyes open so that he could see. But now he asks God to make the Aramean army blind. And then the text tells us the Lord struck them with blindness as Elisha had asked. Then Elisha went out and told them, "You have come the wrong way. This isn't the right city. Follow me, and I will take you to the man you are looking for." Okay, there's a bit of deception going on there, because the man talking to them, telling them this, is in fact the man they're looking for. But apparently they don't know him by voice, so they don't know, and they're blind now, so they, kind of at this guy's mercy. He says, "You're in the wrong city. Here, I'll take you to the right city." What else are they going to do? They can't see. they need help. So this man helps them, and you know, any help when you need it is better than no help at all, huh? So let's scroll up here so we can see the text a little better. Follow me, and I will take you to the man you are looking for. And he led them to the city of Samaria, the very capital of Israel, and the house, the home of the king of Israel. As soon as they had entered Samaria, Elisha prayed, "O Lord, now open their eyes and let them see." So the Lord opened their eyes, and they discovered that they were in the middle of Samaria. Bit shocking, perhaps. When the king of Israel saw them, he shouted to Elisha, "My father, should I kill them? Should I kill them?" "Of course not," Elisha replied. "Do we kill prisoners of war? Give them food and drink, and send them home again to their master." Now, I find this little bit right here fascinating. You may recall back there in 1 Kings that this same king of Aram had come into Israel to attack and had been defeated by Ahab. And when Ben-Hadad sent emissaries to Ahab to seek terms of peace, Ahab talked about Ben-Hadad as his brother. And these emissaries picked up on it real quick. "Yes, your brother, Ben-Hadad, he wants to make peace with you." And so Ahab agreed and made peace with Ben-Hadad, and Ben-Hadad went home and left off, for a short time anyway, attacking Israel. Now, we also read there that one of the prophets, not Elijah himself, but one of the younger prophets, one of the probably the attendees to the school of the prophets, as it's sometimes called, actually had somebody smite him with a sword so he'd be wounded, and then he would bind up his wounds and wait on the road for Ahab to come by so he could tell his little parable to Ahab and then accuse Ahab of malfeasance for letting Ben-Hadad go. And I think we suggested when we read that story that we felt like the prophet wasn't really acting on God's command, that in fact what Ahab had done was a good thing. And that this story now comes in the history of Elisha, and Elisha does something very similar to what Ahab did and says, "Give these men food and drink and send them back to their master." It kind of helps us see that maybe what this prophet back there in Elijah's day and Ahab's day wasn't entirely right. Not exactly what God wanted, even though he said it was what God wanted. So the king made a great feast for them and sent them home to their master. After that, the Aramean raiders stayed away from the land of Israel for a while. Sometime later, however, King Ben-Hadad of Aram mustered his entire army and besieged Samaria. As a result, there was a great famine in the city. The siege lasted so long that his donkey's head sold for 80 pieces of silver. Not a lot of great meat in the head. And a cup of dove's dung sold for 5 pieces of silver. So I don't want to eat that, but they were hungry. They'd eat anything they could get. So, yeah. Definitely a famine here. This is the case. Now the story gets very, very dark. One day, as the king of Israel was walking along the wall of the city, a woman called to him, "Please help me, my lord the king." This is somebody coming to him as the dispenser of justice, and she's going to present her case. He answered, "If the Lord doesn't help you, what can I do?" He's kind of down in the dumps about this whole situation. His city faces a famine. He faces a famine. People are complaining to him about it, and he feels powerless and helpless. "I have neither food from the threshing floor nor wine from the press to give you." But then the king asked, "What is the matter?" She replied, "This woman said to me, 'Come on, let's eat your son today, and then we will eat my son tomorrow.'" I told you this was going to take a very dark turn. "So we cooked my son and ate him. The next day I said to her, 'Kill your son so we can eat him.' But she has hidden her son." When the king heard this, he tore his clothes in despair. And as the king walked along the wall, the people could see that he was wearing burlap under his robe next to the skin. Sackcloth, it would say in the King James. This was a typical demonstration of mourning and sorrow, is to wear this rough, uncomfortable cloth next to the skin, where it'd be really irritating. "May God strike me and even kill me if I don't separate Elisha's head from his shoulders this very day," the king vowed. Now, this might strike us as exceptionally odd. This is the same king whose interactions with Elisha up until this point have been, one, Elisha telling him everything that Ben-Hadad's about to do so that he's ready and able to defend himself. And then, two, Elisha bringing the Aramean soldiers into the city of Samaria in protection of himself, and then ordering him to treat them kindly so that they would go home and, at least for a time, lay off attacking Israel. Maybe he feels that the relief that Elisha offered should have been permanent, and if it wasn't, then it was Elisha's failing that Ben-Hadad had come back to attack Israel again. Well, that's not Elisha's failing, that's Ben-Hadad's failing. His army has encountered a miraculous intervention that protects the prophet of God. The prophet demonstrates that he's not out to destroy Ben-Hadad or Ben-Hadad's army, and he has the king of Israel treat his soldiers kindly. And yet somehow Ben-Hadad gets greedy again and decides to lay siege to the city of Samaria. But in the king's mind, this is Elisha's fault. Not my fault, not Ben-Hadad's fault. This is Elisha's fault, because if he really was serving God and doing what he ought to, he would help make sure that God protected my city. He hasn't done it. It's his fault. I want his head. Literally, that's what he said. Elisha was sitting in his house with the elders of Israel when the king sent a messenger to summon him. But before the messenger arrived, Elisha said to the elders, "A murderer has sent a man to cut off my head. When he arrives, shut the door and keep him out. We will soon hear his master's steps following him. While Elisha was still saying this, the messenger arrived, and the king said, or the messenger said, it's not clear. The Hebrew just says he said, all this misery is from the Lord. Why should I wait for the Lord any longer? Well, no, this misery is not from the Lord. This misery is from Ben-Hadad. And since Ben-Hadad is acting like the destroyer, then you shouldn't be blaming the creator. You should be blaming the destroyer whose tactics Ben-Hadad is emulating. But then recall that at that time in Judah and Israel, they didn't yet have the concept of the destroyer. So if it happened, God did it. And so we're in misery. Well, God did it. This is from the Lord. Why should I wait for the Lord any longer? Next chapter. Well, it didn't read my click. Now it did. Elisha replied. This is kind of an unfortunate chapter break, obviously. Listen to this message from the Lord. This is what the Lord says. By this time tomorrow, in the markets of Samaria, 6 quarts of choice flour. Now, a quart, and this is, they're using English measures, or rather, well, not English measures, but U.S. measures here for our benefit, so we can get a clue in it. But there are, is it 2 cups to a pint, 2 pints to a quart, so 4 cups to a quart. So now you've got 6 quarts, that's 24 cups of choice flour. Will cost only 1 piece of silver, and 12 quarts of barley grain will cost only 1 piece of silver. And the footnotes there are just essentially conversions from the measures given in the Hebrew to our U.S. units of measure. So, there's a famine. Right now it costs you 80 pieces of silver for a donkey's head, 5 for a little thimbleful of burdocky. But you're going to get really good flour, and you're going to get good grain, and it only costs 1 piece of silver. And the prophet says, this is going to happen tomorrow. The officer, probably also the messenger who had been sent, the officer assisting the king, said to the man of God, that couldn't happen, even if the Lord opened the windows of heaven. But Elisha replied, you will see it happen with your own eyes, but you won't be able to eat any of it. Understand, this is just a prediction. He's not saying this is what should happen. He's just saying, you're going to see this, but Yahweh has given me a glimpse of the future, and I see that you won't taste any of this largesse that's about to take place. Now, there were 4 men with leprosy sitting at the entrance of the city gates. Footnote C is probably going to tell us that that just refers to any number of contagious skin diseases. It can describe, the Hebrew word can describe various skin diseases. At any rate, there's these 4 men that have leprosy, which means they have to live outside the city. And they have to go around hollering, unclean, unclean, all that stuff. makes them outcasts. They were sitting at the entrance of the city gates. Why should we sit here waiting to die? They asked each other. This is fatalism in action. We will starve if we stay here. But with a famine in the city, we will starve if we go back there. So we're here, outside the city, no food. There's an army surrounding us. They won't let food through, so everybody's starving. We're about to starve to death. Hey, not going to do us any good to go into the city because all the people in the city are about to starve to death. So we might as well go and surrender to the Aramean army. If they let us live, so much the better. But if they kill us, we would have died anyway. So at twilight, they set out for the camp of the Arameans. This is probably very shortly after the conversation between Elisha and the king's messenger, commander, officer, who's with the king there. But when they came to the edge of the camp, no one was there. For the Lord had caused the Aramean army to hear the clatter of speeding chariots and the galloping of horses and the sounds of a great army approaching. The king of Israel has hired the Hittites and Egyptians to attack us. Footnote D there, let's see what it says. Possibly, and the people of Muzar, a district near Cilicia. Well, whoever it was, they believe that the king of Israel has hired people to attack them. So they believe they're under attack. They cry to one another, so they panicked and ran into the night, abandoning their tents, horses, donkeys, and everything else as they fled for their lives. Well, they weren't really running for their lives. There wasn't any real threat. But God let them believe there was a threat so that they would lift the siege on Samaria. When the men with leprosy arrived at the edge of the camp, they went into one tent after another, eating and drinking wine. And they carried off silver and gold and clothing and hid it. These guys have run across a great... They're not hungry anymore. There's gobs of food. You've got all the food for an entire army. As they go from tent to tent, there's food. Here's more food. There's silver and gold and clothing and all this neat stuff. All of a sudden, they're the richest man in the country. So they start hiding it. But finally they said to each other, this isn't right. This is a day of good news. We aren't sharing it with anyone. If we wait until morning, some calamity will certainly fall upon us. Come, let's go back and tell the people at the palace. So their conscience pricks them. They say, wait a minute, we're being selfish here. This is good news. There's plenty here. Everybody can have some. We need to go tell them. So they went back to the city and told the gatekeepers what had happened. We went out to the Aramean camp, they said, and no one was there. The horses and donkeys were tethered, and the tents were all in order, but there wasn't a single person around. Well, then the gatekeepers shouted the news to the people in the palace. Now we get to see the nature of the king of Israel. Yes, he's seen the miracles of Elisha, but at the same time, he's gotten mad at Elisha and said, you're God's messenger, God's done this to us. May God deal with me, be it ever so severely, if I don't relieve your shoulders of your head. The king got out of bed in the middle of the night and told his officers, I know what has happened. The Arameans know we're starving, so they have left their camp and have hidden in the fields. They are expecting us to leave the city, and then they will take us alive and capture the city. They'll make us their slaves. This is a ruse. He's skeptical. He's paranoid, perhaps we could even say. He doesn't believe the good news that has come back to the city through these lepers. One of his officers replied, we had better send out scouts to check into this. Let them take 5 of the remaining horses. If something happens to them, it will be no worse than if they stay here and die with the rest of us. So the same fatalistic thinking going on here as went on amongst the 4 lepers. So 2 chariots with horses were prepared, and the king sent scouts to see what had happened to the Aramean army. They went all the way to the Jordan River, following a trail of clothing and equipment that the Arameans had thrown away in their mad rush to escape. The scouts returned and told the king about it. Then the people of Samaria rushed out and plundered the Aramean camp. So it was true that 6 quarts of choice flour were sold that day for 1 piece of silver, and 12 quarts of barley grain were sold for 1 piece of silver, just as the Lord had promised. The king appointed his officer to control traffic at the gate. This is the man who went to Elisha the day before with the king, and the one who, well, you'll recall what he'd said. The king appointed his officer to control traffic at the gate, but he was knocked down and trampled to death as the people rushed out. Now, this is not an unknown phenomenon, even in our day. We have seen instances where somebody forgot to unlock a gate at the end of, say, a sports event, and the crowds rush down to get out and to leave the place. They want to go home. And when the people in front of them don't keep moving, they start pushing. Come on, let's go. We want to get out of here. Well, the gate's locked, so the people at the front can't move. But the people keep pushing and pushing until the people in the front are crushed to death. This has happened in our day. And this is kind of what happened to this poor royal official who gets sent down to control traffic at the gate. Well, you can't control a mad rush like that. People who are about to starve get word that there's food outside the city free, just go out there and get it. And you're going to try and control that? So the poor guy heard the story, saw the people going out after it, but he didn't live to tell the tale. So everything happened exactly as the man of God had predicted when the king came to his house. The man of God had said to the king, by this time tomorrow in the markets of Samaria, all that stuff, 1 piece of silver. The king's officer had replied, that couldn't happen even if the Lord opened the windows of heaven. And the man of God had said, you will see it happen with your own eyes, but you won't be able to eat any of it. And so it was, for the people trampled him to death at the gate. Now, one might wonder, why would God treat the people like this? If he intended to deliver them, why would he wait until things were so desperate that at least some people were stooping to cannibalism in an attempt to survive? But then we understand that sometimes, particularly in cases of addiction, that a person has to hit what we call rock bottom. They have to get to a point in their lives where they finally wake up to the terrible condition they have gotten themselves in before they are willing to seek help. So maybe this was a case of God not helping the people because they weren't open to his help and did not open themselves to his help until they reached this drastic state of things where cannibalism actually became part of what was going on. And then finally, the people were open to relief from divine agencies. And when they were open to it, the relief arrived, and they had plenty to eat. Now, was this part of this next story we're about to read? And before I mention it, let's go on and read this first verse so we know what I'm talking about. Elisha had told the woman whose son he had brought back to life, "Take your family and move to some other place, for the Lord has called for a famine on Israel that will last for 7 years." Now recall that the famine in Ahab's day, when Elijah came and warned Ahab about it and then disappeared, that famine was only 3 years. This famine was 7 years. And is it possible this famine is part of what led to the siege of Samaria and was why the city was in such desperate straits? You've already got a famine, then you put a siege on top of that, and things can get really desperate in a big hurry. But this woman had left Israel at the advice of Elisha. It says, "So the woman did as the man of God instructed. She took her family and settled in the land of the Philistines for 7 years. After the famine ended, she returned from the land of the Philistines, and she went to see the king about getting back her house and land." Now, here's a very fascinating aspect of the story, because it says, as she came in, the king was talking with Gehazi, the servant of the man of God. This is what makes me wonder if perhaps it was in fact Gehazi whose eyes were open to see the troops, even though according to the chronology here, although maybe the chronology is a little out of place, maybe the story of Naaman hadn't happened yet. I can't tell you. I don't know. You know, we're told these stories, but they may or may not be in chronological order. In which case, now we see Gehazi still named as the servant of the man of God. So maybe the guy who had his eyes open in Dothan was Gehazi. How are we to know? The king had just said, "Tell me some stories about the great things Elisha has done." And Gehazi was telling the king about the time Elisha had brought a boy back to life. At that very moment, the mother of the boy walked in to make her appeal to the king about her house and land. "Look, my lord the king," Gehazi exclaimed, "here is the woman now, and this is her son, the very one Elisha brought back to life." Now, one of the things that makes me think this may be before the story of Naaman is just the fact that Gehazi is able to stand in the king's presence and talk to him like this. If at this point he had leprosy or whatever disease it was that was indicated, the traditions and laws of the nation didn't make a distinction if they called it leprosy. They were required to separate themselves from the rest of the people to prevent spread of contagion. So I don't think Gehazi would be let into the palace as a leper. Just say. At any rate, the woman walks in and Gehazi says, "This is the woman, and this is her son. This is the very boy that Elisha brought back to life. Here they are, my lord the king." "Is this true?" the king asked her, and she told him the story. So he directed one of his officials to see that everything she had lost was restored to her, including the value of any crops that had been harvested during her absence. And this was according to the laws of Israel. She was gone. Somebody farmed the land anyway. But the value of that belonged to the owner, not to them. Now, I'm assuming that they would be able to keep enough to pay for their labor and the seed that they planted, but the value of any crops would go to her. The profit, as we might think of it, would go to her. Elisha went to Damascus, the capital of Aram, where King Ben-Hadad lay sick. When someone told the king that the man of God had come, the king said to Hazael, "Take a gift to the man of God, then tell him to ask the Lord, 'Will I recover from this illness?'" Now, we know from the story of Naaman that the kings of Aram did not worship Yahweh. They worshiped their own gods. But apparently, the events up to this point had convinced Ben-Hadad that there was something superior about the God of Israel. And so he's hearing from the other gods whatever the priests of those gods think the king wants to hear. That's how they operate. You don't speak truth to power. If you want to remain the advisor of the power, you do your best to figure out what he wants to hear, and then that's what you tell him. And you say that your God has said it, even though you haven't heard peep from them ever. Take a gift to the man of God, then tell him to ask the Lord, "Will I recover from my illness?" So Hazael loaded down 40 camels with the finest products of Damascus as a gift for Elisha. That's a lot of stuff. Naaman came with a handful of donkeys. Now Hazael shows up with 40 camels. Camels can carry a little bit more than a donkey. Yeah? There's 40 of them. Finest products of Damascus. He wants to give it to Elisha. I'm going to guess that Elisha didn't take it. It doesn't tell us, but if he didn't take Naaman's gift, he probably didn't accept this gift either. He went to him, that is, Hazael went to Elisha and said, "Your servant Ben-Hadad, the king of Aram, has sent me to ask, 'Will I recover from this illness?'" And Elisha replied, "Go and tell him, 'You will surely recover.'" But actually, the Lord has shown me that he will surely die. Elisha stared at Hazael with a fixed gaze until Hazael became uneasy. Then the man of God started weeping. Footnotes A and B there. he stared at him, and then the meaning of the Hebrew is uncertain. But I think the point is made, and we have to understand it from the context, that Hazael became uncomfortable with what he was seeing. And it says, then the man of God started weeping. What's the matter, my lord? Hazael asked him. Elisha replied, I know the terrible things you will do to the people of Israel. You will burn their fortified cities, kill their young men with a sword, dash their little children to the ground, and rip open their pregnant women. Hazael responded, how could a nobody like me ever accomplish such great things? A dog, in the Hebrew, in that culture, the term dog was for indicated lowlifes. I'm the worst of the worst. How could a dog like me do this? And I find it interesting also, it says, ever accomplished such great things. He's in the presence of the man of God from Israel, and the man of God of Israel has just described him destroying the people of the nation in ghastly, negative ways. But even though he's in the presence of this man of God from Israel, he has it in his mind, the whole concept of Israel and Aram being at war. Therefore, anything you do to destroy your enemy is a great thing and worthy of great honor in your home country. So how could a dog like me ever accomplish such great things? Well, look at the prophet. He's crying. He's not happy about this. He's saddened because he sees through divine assistance the future. He sees what this man Hazael will do, and it distresses him. Elisha answered, the Lord has shown me that you are going to be the king of Aram. When Hazael left Elisha and went back, the king asked him, what did Elisha tell you? And Hazael replied, he told me that you will surely recover. He's doing exactly what Elisha had told him to do. But the next day, Hazael took a blanket, soaked it in water, and held it over the king's face until he died. Then Hazael became the next king of Aram. So it's not just in Israel. This is a thing of the whole culture of the region. If you killed the king, you got to be the king. Puts you in a precarious situation, because if anybody can replace you as king by killing you, you better have people you trust around you to protect you from all these people who are likely to say, hey, I'd like to be king. How about I kill the king and I can do it? So here in Aram, we have another case of an assassin becoming the king. Now, this is where we see the first fulfillment of the two of the three tasks given to Elijah. Elijah was told to do these three things: anoint Jehu king of Israel, anoint Hazael king of Aram, and anoint Elisha to succeed you. Well, the very first thing that Elijah did when he got back was to run across Elisha and to choose him to be his servant and to succeed him once he was no longer in the picture. So now, here it is, who knows, many years later, And finally, Elisha, in a sense, takes care of anointing Hazael to be the king of Aram. He didn't do it like we would normally expect, but then he wasn't the prophet of Aram, he was the prophet of Israel. So he wouldn't do the same kinds of things in Aram that he would do in Israel. And you'll notice that Hazael decided to take action himself. He wasn't going to wait for Yahweh to see to Ben-Hadad's death. He took care of it himself. Now here's the names I was trying to come up with and couldn't. Jehoram and Joram, although they may indeed be the same name. Jehoram, son of King Jehoshaphat of Judah, began to rule over Judah in the 5th year of the reign of Joram, son of Ahab, king of Israel. Now recall that Joram took the throne of Israel a couple of years after his father's death, that his brother Ahaziah had been king of Israel for a couple of years prior to that. Jehoram was 32 years old when he became king, and he reigned in Jerusalem 8 years. Means he would have died at only 40. Well, we're going to see why that is. He did die young. But Jehoram followed the example of the kings of Israel and was as wicked as King Ahab, for he had married one of Ahab's and Jezebel's daughters. So Jehoram did what was evil in the Lord's sight, but the Lord did not want to destroy Judah, for he had promised his servant David that his descendants would continue to rule, shining like a lamp forever. During Jehoram's reign, the Edomites revolted against Judah and crowned their own king. So Jehoram, or the Hebrew says Joram, which is a variant spelling of Jehoram, also in other verses in this chapter. So Jehoram went with all his chariots to attack the town of Zair, or Seir, S-E-I-R. We know that Seir was one of the towns, so this is possibly a variant spelling. The Greek version reads Seir. All right. The Edomites surrounded him and his chariot commanders, but he went out at night and attacked under cover of darkness. Or the footnote F there is going to say it may actually mean escape. The meaning of the Hebrew is a little uncertain. The attacked or escaped. I think escape makes more sense as we read on, because then it says, but Jehoram's army deserted him and fled to their homes. So he escapes, and so does his army, and they leave Edom. And then it says, so Edom, that is the nation descended from Esau, has been independent from Judah to this day. That is the day that this was written. The town of Libnah also revolted about that same time. Now, we're going to read about Libnah later in the story of Hezekiah. Apparently, Hezekiah was able to regain control of Libnah. But at this point, Jehoram has lost Edom and Libnah. The rest of the events in Jehoram's reign and everything he did are recorded in the book of the history of the kings of Judah. When Jehoram died, he was buried with his ancestors in the city of David. Then his son Ahaziah became the next king. Okay, I was wrong when I was saying we know why he died young. We don't. He just died young, only 40 years old. Then his son Ahaziah became the next king. Ahaziah, son of Jehoram, began to rule, scroll too far, over Judah in the 12th year of the reign of Joram, son of Ahab, king of Israel. Yeah, okay. I was doing a little mental math there. It worked out. Not exactly, but that's to be understood. Ahaziah was 22 years old when he became king, meaning that his dad was only 18 when he was born. And he reigned in Jerusalem 1 year. This is the really young death, but we'll see why that is. His mother was Athaliah, a granddaughter of King Omri of Israel. Well, yeah, that's kind of a long way of saying that she was a daughter of Ahab and Jezebel. Ahaziah followed the evil example of King Ahab's family. He did what was evil in the Lord's sight, just as Ahab's family had done, for he was related by marriage to the family of Ahab. Ahaziah joined Joram, son of Ahab, in his war against King Hazael of Aram at Ramoth Gilead. When the Arameans wounded King Joram in the battle, he returned to Jezreel to recover from the wounds he had received at Ramoth. Because Joram was wounded, King Ahaziah of Judah went to Jezreel to visit him. Recall that King Ahaziah is brother-in-law to King Joram. No, his mother is Joram's sister. So he's nephew to King Joram of Israel. So, all in the family, he goes up there to visit. And let me check the time. We've only got about 7 minutes, but we might be able to get the next story in even if we quit in the middle of the chapter again. Meanwhile, Elisha the prophet had summoned a member of the group of the prophets. Get ready to travel, he told him, which probably means that the Hebrew says gird up your loins, bind up your loins. Yeah, gird up, bind up. Yeah, okay, that's what I figured. He told him, and take this flask of olive oil with you. Go to Ramoth Gilead and find Jehu, son of Jehoshaphat, son of Nimshi. Call him into a private room away from his friends and pour the oil over his head. Now that's the typical style of anointing in the land of Israel. Say to him, this is what Yahweh says. I anoint you to be the king over Israel. Then open the door and run for your life. Probably wise advice, although one would wonder why you would have to run from somebody after telling him he's going to be king. That's generally considered good news. Why would you need to flee for fear that he'd kill you? Well, I don't know, but anyway. The young prophet did as he was told and went to Ramoth Gilead. When he arrived there, he found Jehu sitting around with the other army officers. I have a message for you, commander, he said. For which one of us? Jehu asked. For you, commander, he replied. So Jehu left the others and went into the house. Then the young prophet poured the oil over Jehu's head and said, This is what the Lord, the God of Israel, says. I anoint you king over the Lord's people, Israel. You are to destroy the family of Ahab, your master. In this way, I will avenge the murder of my prophets and all the Lord's servants who were killed by Jezebel. Now, all this verbiage we just read here, starting at the end of verse 6, is not included in the information that Elisha gave to this young prophet. So you might assume that he did and it's just not told to us, but it's also possible that this prophet is kind of acting on his own and adding these things to it because of his worldview and what he thought a new king of Israel ought to do. You were to destroy the family of Ahab, your master. In this way I will avenge the murder of my prophets and all the Lord's servants who were killed by Jezebel. Well, this young man may well have had relatives and friends who were killed in Jezebel's pogroms. So it might have a reason to say this. The entire family of Ahab must be wiped out. I will destroy every one of his male descendants, slave and free alike, anywhere in Israel. I will destroy the family of Ahab as I destroyed the family of Jeroboam, son of Nebat, and Baasha, son of Ahijah. Dogs will eat Ahab's wife Jezebel at the plot of land in Jezreel, and no one will bury her. Then the young prophet opened the door and ran. Jehu went back to his fellow officers, and one of them asked him, "What that madman wants? Everything all right?" "You know how a man like that babbles on," Jehu replied. "You're hiding something," they said. "Tell us." So Jehu told them. He said to me, "This is what the Lord says. I have anointed you to be king over Israel." Then they quickly spread out their cloaks on the bare steps and blew the ram's horn, shouting, "Jehu is king!" And looking at the time, I'm thinking that while we're only halfway through the chapter here, I think that we've reached a heading. I think it's a good place to stop. So we'll read the rest of this story. Some of you may know what's coming up. And where we get the saying, "drives like Jehu." That comes from something we're going to read in this very chapter as we go further on. But we'll have to wait till next week for that. So, looks like things have worked out so well. Our internet connection is not giving us grief tonight. So, we thank you for joining us. We invite you to join us again next week as we continue this. And until then, we say goodbye and God bless.